there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to anxiety, OCD, treatment of it, and trying to get your life back. My name is Kevin Foss. I'm a licensed therapist, and I specialize in the treatment of OCD and anxiety. And I just want to thank you all for joining this episode today, episode 27. We keep going up there in numbers. A shout out to everybody who made it to IOCDF in the past couple of weeks. I unfortunately have not been able to go in the past couple of years, but I'm hoping to be able to go next year. So for everybody who went to the International OCD Foundation's national conference in Austin, I hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you learned a lot. Hope you made some great connections and are just pumped to keep moving forward and to keep challenging yourself, learning more about OCD and what can ultimately help you get your life back. That's the whole point of them. So that is awesome for those of you who are able to go. All right, so for those of you who are new to the podcast, thank you for joining us today. And I just wanted to let you know that the Fearcast is intending to be a podcast for you listeners to be able to call in, or to email in now, to email in questions about your own treatment, about just anxiety issues in general. And this can include specific phobias, it can, heights, snakes, spiders, public speaking, all that stuff. In addition to OCD and any of its various manifestations and subtypes and all that stuff that we've talked about in the past. I want to hear all of your questions, and I want to answer all of them. If you have your questions, you can go to fearcastpodcast.com and go to the submit a question there and send me a message. And thank you all for the questions that you've already sent in. For those of you who are return listeners, thank you all for coming back and keep on listening. If you could do me a favor, and whatever platform you are listening to this podcast on, give me a thumbs up, give me a like, give me a review. I'd love to hear it. And ultimately, again, it helps new listeners find the podcast, and new listeners mean new questions, and new questions mean more episodes, and the cycle continues. So that's the whole purpose of it. So before we get into a couple of the questions that I'm going to answer today, I want to get into something that's exciting for me. I announced a couple of episodes ago that there's something exciting going on in the Fearcast world, and now I'm actually able to tell everybody what this exciting thing is. Now, again, this is exciting for me. I don't know if it's going to be exciting for everybody else, but and even if, as I'm explaining that, it feels like I'm blowing it up way out of proportion. But we'll see. So, again, a couple of the episodes ago, I had mentioned something exciting is going to happen. And that exciting thing is I am going to be starting my own practice. So I'm leaving my current practice that I've been with for the past over 6.5 years, and I'm going to be starting the California OCD and Anxiety Treatment Center, and I'm opening up an office here in Fullerton. So I am super, super excited to be starting this new adventure and this new endeavor. It's been something that I've been thinking about for a really long time. I've been stressing about it. I've been worried about it. I've been excited about it and dreaming about what it could look like and what it could be, and I'm excited to now share that with all of you. What's even cooler is I'm opening up the office with my wife, who is a psychologist, and she'll be doing her own thing. I'll be doing the OCD thing, but it's kind of this dream that she and I rather have been bantering back and forth. So there'll be more news coming out, and I can't take any clients, or I'm not going to be starting there with anybody until September 1st of this year. But for the future, to find more information about it, you can go to calocd.com. So CAL, like California, OCD.com. And there'll be some information up there. But why I've had to put off this episode is because we have been scrambling to furnish 3 offices, a waiting room, a hallway. I've been having to write a ton of content and build a business from the ground up, and it's exhausting. Oh, in addition to also having a life, having a full practice, trying to be at the very least a non-negligent or a less negligent father and husband, for that matter. So there's just a ton of stuff going on. So I apologize for this episode coming out late, but that's the exciting stuff that's happening. So in addition to starting a new business and the excitement of it, there's also a lot of my own anxiety that's bouncing between my ears. And as exciting it is to think about how wonderful it could be and the freedom that could be of like building my own schedule and doing all that stuff, it's also terrifying. And I think in a future episode, I'll share some of those anxieties. A future question is going to be about cognitive distortions, and that might be a fantastic time to start sharing some of my own distorted thoughts about this practice and how it's going to go. And just because I'm an anxiety therapist doesn't mean that I am free or devoid of all anxiety. Every OCD and anxiety therapist you're ever going to meet has their own anxieties. If they tell you they don't, they're lying to you, or they're a little nuts. They don't experience anxiety. That's a natural human emotion they should be feeling. So I'm not going to judge them. I will let you judge them. So you can do that all you want. So for future information about it, you can go to calocd.com and check me out there if you have any questions or would like to potentially get started in treatment or looking for some resources or referrals. You can always check me out there. Speaking of checking me out for information, I think some of you know that I'm on Instagram as Fearcast Podcast, and this first question actually comes from a listener on Instagram. So why don't we jump into the questions? All right, so this first question comes from Jared via Instagram. Hi there. Long story short, at the end of 2017, God called me back after a few years of teenage backsliding. I was so excited to hear from Jesus and was determined to live for him. About 10 months ago, I read the verse about blaspheming the Holy Spirit and had a thought against the Holy Spirit. I completely freaked out at the time, but eventually calmed down when I found out that I'd never actually blasphemed the Holy Spirit. One thing led to the next, and I was getting anxiety and intrusive thoughts about every aspect of my faith. It eventually got me to the point where I was questioning whether I truly believed in God. I was completely wrecked and in tears daily. He then goes on to say, I still have these thoughts, but instead of questioning, do I? Now it's, I don't believe in God or love God, etc. And the worst thing is that now it's like I don't even care, and it's almost as if I've accepted the thoughts. I still pray with little faith and have a negative mindset. Is it possible for a sufferer to no longer feel anxiety about certain intrusive thoughts, but instead feeling numb towards the thoughts as if the thought has become a reality? Just a side note, I'm struggling to find someone who specializes in OCD, and I haven't been diagnosed with OCD scrupulosity, which makes it even harder to accept. Thanks. Well, Jared, thank you so much for your question. I know in your question you specified kind of what country and what area you are in, but I wanted to leave that out to help some anonymity. For those internationally, probably the best resource that I know of, if there isn't a OCD kind of group in the country that you're currently in, I would contact the International OCD Foundation. So they're going to be iocdf.org, and they're the folks who put on the conference every year. Likely speaking, Jared, if you were to contact them, they probably know someone in your country that you'd be able to work with. But so the best thing would be to go over to their website or find out how you can give them a call. Again, IOCDF, International OCD Foundation.org, and check them out. Hopefully they do have some resources or have some ideas on how you can get connected. But separate from that, so thank you so much for this question. I'm so sorry you're having to go through this, and I feel so thankful and appreciative that one, you found the Scrup episodes, I'm presuming, and also that you would include me in your recovery journey with this question. I mean, this is hard and scary stuff for folks who are dealing with religious scrupulosity. Their faith is the most central thing to their life. So to have their OCD latch onto their faith is so devastating. Obviously, every subtype can feel devastating, and certainly is devastating. But for religious scrupulosity, it just feels so personal. So the pain that you're talking about is I can hear it, or I can read it in your message to me. Jared, what I find so telling in what you have said is while you said, I still have these thoughts, but instead of questioning, do I, you said, now it's, I don't. So it's, I don't believe in God. I don't love God, things like that. However, you said you still pray daily. Now, those two things are opposing one another, because the thought, I would say the intrusive thought that you're having that is absolutely your OCD is this thought that you don't believe or you don't love God. For someone you don't believe in and don't love, you sure are having conversations with this person or being or whatever quite a bit. If you're saying you are still praying, though with little faith and a negative mindset, you still are returning to and stressing about something you say or your brain says you don't believe in. So that's certainly something to take note. And in some ways, you can use that to challenge the legitimacy of that thought that says you don't believe. You kind of do. Now, to the main point of your question, you said, is it possible for a sufferer to no longer feel anxiety about certain intrusive thoughts, but instead feeling numb towards the thoughts as if the thoughts had become a reality? I'll say absolutely that can happen. For a couple of reasons. The one thing that had just jumped out of the top of my mind is what you're kind of talking about is the goal of ERP for a lot of folks is to no longer feel anxiety about certain thoughts. You're saying that's the thing that's making me feel so terrified is the lack of anxiety or the lack of feeling. Now, sometimes what this means is you might be experiencing a backdoor spike. Now, a backdoor spike is usually what happens through therapy when someone is working really hard to habituate to their anxiety. And once their anxiety then starts to subside, their anxiety re-spikes because their brain says, oh, see, you're no longer afraid of, or you don't get that anxious rush anymore with this stuff. So now your fear is real. Now what you've been most terrified of is genuine. So it shows up in the reverse. You often see it with like HOCD, so homosexual or sexual orientation OCD, where folks work towards, thinking about gay stuff or thinking about homoerotic thoughts or watching homoerotic movies or imagery. Eventually get used to it, but now their brain says, oh, see, gay people aren't uncomfortable by this stuff. You're not uncomfortable by it. Therefore, you're gay. So that's one thing that may be going on here is you might be experiencing a backdoor spike. The other thing that may be going on here is that you're sometimes we just get to this place of numbness with our anxiety. We just have stressed about it and thought about it and worried about it for so long. We can't even rouse ourselves into feeling uncomfortable anymore. We just feel exhausted by it. And then we just keep plodding along in our life, expecting that we're supposed to feel something. Now, sometimes this will happen in the course of treatment with some folks, and then the shift can subtly move from the focus being on anxiety to the focus being on whatever feeling you're experiencing. Now, this is where mindful approaches can be really, really helpful, Jared. I'd almost want you to shift your mindset from it being, from saying you might be saying like your enemy is anxiety, or you're trying to get rid of anxiety, or you're trying to tolerate anxiety, to instead trying to focus it on an unwanted feeling state. That's a broad way of saying the stuff that you don't want to feel. Now, typically, a lot of the folks that I work with, they say, well, anxiety is the unwanted feeling state. Great, so let's call it by name. But sometimes the unwanted feeling state that we're obsessing about or hyper-focusing on and trying to do compulsions about to try to get rid of or to undo or to alleviate in some way, some maladaptive way that is depression. or as sadness, or is a amorphous, empty feeling, or is this kind of ominous doom kind of feeling. For you, it's this numbness. Now, it certainly is a feeling you never wanted, you never asked to have, but it's there, and it's there surrounding your faith. Now, if you go back and listen to the episode about Scrupulosity with Father Tom Santa, he kind of talks about being flexible with the feelings that we have and not expecting to have one feeling over another. So often we try in Faithland to have the mountaintop experiences at all times and to feel fully connected to God. Now, of course, that's a wonderful feeling for those of us to try to seek out and certainly to have. But when OCD says this is the ultimate and only things that you have to have, and the absence of it means that you have nothing or that you have no faith, that is the deception that OCD is going to use to try to pull you down further into it. So instead of trying to focus on trying to get that feeling, trying to refocus back on what that numbness feels like and seeing if you can make space in your life for this numbness. That for right now, numbness is a part of your life. And you would say, well, it is, but I don't want it. It's like, but the problem is your anxiety and your brain and your feelings don't care about how you feel. Now, again, this is where I'm going to say that I'm the only therapist on earth that's going to tell you that feelings are stupid. Right. Happiness, when we say that's the ultimate feeling, it's that no, it's not. Or fulfillment, or passion, or something like that, is that we put too much credit on the feelings that we have. Rather, we need to be flexible with what we're feeling, and sometimes the feelings that we have are irrational or they're excessive. So we need to put less stock in them. Feelings are stupid. Instead, refocusing on what is ultimately important in your life. If faith conceptually is important to you, pursue faith without the expectation that you're going to have this great and grand, wonderful feeling, but doing the things that are important to you. Now, if the only thing that was important to you within your faith practice was getting that feeling, then perhaps that's a bigger story about how your OCD was wrapped up already in your faith, but that's presuming some things, Jared, that may or may not be there. So, Jared, I think lastly on this, and I know I'm jumping around, I didn't have time to really, I didn't go down and put a proper full outline together, so I apologize if I am bouncing all over. But the last thing that I want to talk about here is that you said, let's see here, the worst is that now it's like I don't even care, and it's almost as if I've accepted the thoughts. Well, what I would encourage you to do, and this is going to sound weird, and it's kind of the splitting hairs in this, but you're accepting the content of the thought as opposed to accepting the presence of the thought. So what that means is that you're accepting the words that your brain is giving you. It says, I don't care about God, or I don't have faith. You're accepting those words and what it says, as opposed to, I accept that thought and that feeling is something that I'm experiencing in this very moment. I'll give you an example about the difference between accepting the content versus accepting the reality of the thought, the presence of the thought. Is that if I were to write down on a piece of paper, I am an antelope, and then I was to have you read it, you would say, I am an antelope. Now, if you were to agree with the content of what you said, you would have to therefore be an antelope. Now, Jared, I don't think that you're an antelope. I mean, I'm looking at your Instagram avatar, and you don't look very antelope-y. But it's possible with your little hooves that you've gotten a fantastic, costume going on. I don't know. But to accept the content of the phrasing, I'm an antelope, well, our brain is going to give us all sorts of crazy thoughts about who we are, what we want, what we believe. I mean, we can have thoughts of, I hate this guy. I should hit this guy. I should run them over with my car. We can have thoughts of, I'm a loser. We can have thoughts of, I'm going to fail. Now, if we believed everything we thought, oh my gosh, that'd be awful, wouldn't it? But instead, we don't. For things that are not our obsessions, we typically just notice those thoughts and go, whatever, those are dumb thoughts. Or, for me, I call them my crazy man thoughts. Those are, I'm thinking like a crazy man with that. But for our obsessions or our biggest fears, we latch onto it. So instead of doing that, I want you to accept and acknowledge that that thought is there in that moment, kind of like the passing of the weather where you are. You look outside, you say it's hot. It's hot here in Southern California. It's bonkers hot right now. So, but now I acknowledge that it's hot. I certainly don't like it, but it is hot. Now, it doesn't mean then that it's always going to be hot. It doesn't mean that then forever it's going to be that way, or that, coolness is never going to return, or that I can't still live my life or try to do things despite the fact that it's really hot. Now, I can say it's hot, and that's an observation of the temperature. But if I were to say, today is awful, well, that's kind of a judgment on it, isn't it? You can have the thought, I don't believe, but you can also say, well, yeah, I have that thought. Yes, it's there, but, well, it doesn't always have to be true. I can still pursue my faith as best I can despite this feeling. So, Jared, I that was the rambling version of my answer to that, and I appreciate for your patience. I know you asked me that question a couple of weeks ago, and just after I finish this episode, I will message you back and tell you that I will be answering this in a future episode. So, thank you so much for your question, and if you have any questions about it, or if any listeners have any feedback for Jared and want to just give him some advice, feel free to write me in, and I will post that on a future episode. So thanks so much. All right, so my next question comes from June. She asks, thanks for the wonderful podcast. I'm in a confusing situation. At first I had earworms, music playing in my head, and then when I was reading about it, it appeared to be something to do with the hyperawareness OCD subtype. When I read about common obsessions in the subtype, I searched for awareness of present thinking, and the results got me terrified with questions like, what if I'm always aware of my thinking, and will I ever be able to think again? When I get into situations where thinking is needed, I tend to avoid them. I'm terrified because we always think, and I don't know what to do. I'm scared I won't be able to think anymore. It seems like any problem I face, I get into trouble trying to work it out. All right, June. Well, thank you so much for that question. And again, just like Jared, I'm so sorry you're having to go through this. And you're right. With what you're describing here, somewhat falls under hyperawareness OCD. Now, for listeners, if you heard that question and that kind of sounded like you, I would encourage you to go back to a previous episode. It would be episode 18 on sensory motor and hyperawareness. It's one of the subtypes of OCD. And sensory motor and hyperawareness. Well, sensory motor tends to focus on typical bodily functions, things that our body does. So blinking and breathing and the feel and sound of our heartbeat, or the sensations of our hands, or the sensations of our scalp. Sometimes it's floaters in our vision. Hyperawareness can certainly be all of that. Think about sensory motor being under the umbrella of hyperawareness, which is just hyper focus and awareness on something. It can be anything. We can be hyper aware, certainly of the sound of our heartbeat. We can be hyper aware of our thoughts. We can be hyper aware of like the sounds on the street. We can be hyper aware of like screeching noises in cars, like when cars stop, or when like fan belts and stuff like that are loose and they squeak really loud. We can just be super aware of that. So, June, I know folks who experience sensory motor hyperawareness OCD, they are just immensely frustrated with all of this. And often the common thought is, will this ever go away? And that's ultimately the biggest fear is, am I ever going to be myself again? Am I ever going to have my thoughts again? And it can feel kind of hopeless because everything that you're doing is to try to get rid of these thoughts or to try to get rid of the awareness of the thought. But the problem is trying to get rid of the awareness of the thought is only turning your attention towards the thoughts even further. So now, whenever you're evaluating your thoughts, because you're obviously turning your attention more towards your own thoughts and trying to get rid of it, you're now saying, all right, am I thinking about my thoughts now? Well, yes. Okay, well, how about now? Am I thinking about my thoughts now? Well, yeah. So that whole cycle gets obnoxious and frustrating. And you're saying, yeah, duh, that's why I wrote it. So June, what I want to say is that what you're experiencing is something that other folks do experience, and it is a well-known subtype of OCD, at least in OCD land. The average therapist may or may not ever hear about this, but I've certainly heard about it. I do want to give you some encouragement that hyperawareness OCD is not the end of the world. It is just like all the other subtypes of OCD. It is far too much thought given to a thought, far too much attention given to a thought that gives you anxiety. And then what you're trying to do is trying to do something to either get rid of that thought or make sure that that feared story never happens. Or at the very least feel better, even temporarily. Now, once you've done that, you go, oh my God, it worked. Now I need to do that over and over and over again. And because you felt relief, your brain goes, oh, good, we should do that again. And the whole cycle begins. Here's the other problem. You and I and everybody else thinks. This is one of the unfortunate side effects of having a human brain, is the fact that you think about stuff. And therein lies the problem, is that you think. And that your brain is arbitrarily attached this meaning and value and judgment to your thoughts. You're essentially saying, I don't want to think anymore, or I want to go back to the person I was where I didn't think. And I would challenge that and say, you always thought, and you were always aware of your thoughts, but maybe perhaps this fear started showing up. You were able to disregard that, or you paid less attention to it when it was there. But you're now in this place where it's kind of this BC-AD sort of situation where you have gained function. You have gained a new superpower that you didn't want and doesn't really get you very much, other than annoyed. And that superpower is being aware of your thoughts. Now, it's a superpower that kind of all of us have, but you just really have. All of us can turn our attention towards our thoughts. It's our internal monologue or sometimes dialogue, and it's the words that go through our mind. It's how we interact with our internal experience. It's how we evaluate and judge and plan and all that stuff that's going on in our head. But now you're noticing it, and there's almost this second voice, or now it's experienced as the second voice from who it is that you are. And you're going, hey, shoosh. So June, to cut to the chase, one of the most important things that you can do is start practicing mindfulness. Acceptance commitment therapy, I think, is great for this. And what it ultimately is going to help you to do is to recognize and acknowledge that, you know what, yeah, your brain is doing this. You don't like it, you don't want it, but it's certainly happening. You notice that second thought in your head, and you notice the judgment about that second thought in your head. And you don't want to go through that process, but we want to try to shift your attention and your efforts towards that, from being an active thought to being a passive thought. Active thoughts are the stuff that you are participating in and fighting in and trying to change. The passive stuff is the stuff that's just kind of in the back of your head, the stuff that, your brain gives you a thought and you go, oh, okay, whatever, and you kind of let it go. Or it's kind of that process where you're kind of thinking and planning about something, but it's in the background and you're not really paying attention to it because you're doing something else. It's passive thinking. Now, obviously, it's easier said than done to shift that, or to shift your focus. But what mindfulness can help you to do is to better practice the shift and better practice allowing that thought to be a passive thought, something that doesn't have to take up your day. Now, what I will say is these thoughts are going to be there. Your brain is going to continue to think. The shift also for you, it's more of a personal and emotional shift, is the acceptance that you now have this brain function. And now there's got to be a way to figure out how you can best live with that feeling. It's kind of like, if you got into a car accident and you lost an arm or a leg, you'd have to accept that you now have one less arm or leg. Well, it's part of life. For you or for that person, it's that they now have that one less body part. Now, that person is either going to spend all their time being really ticked off and pissed off about the fact that they don't have that arm, and they're going to think about all the things that they can't do anymore because of that arm or leg, or they can try to say, you know what, I'm going to try to live the best one-armed life that I can, or one-legged life that I possibly can. for you when that thought comes in, rather than going to that place of trying to avoid thoughts, in other words, trying to suppress the thoughts that, specifically about noticing your thoughts, and then the one that says, oh my God, what if I'm never going to think this way again? What am I going to do? Is to say, you know what? Yeah, I do have these thoughts, and they're there, and I'm going to set up a little chair for them right next to me in my life, and I'm going to be in a meeting, and I'm going to be thinking about my thoughts, and I'm going to be with my partner, and I'm going to be thinking about these thoughts, and there's going to be this kind of person, this tag along that's going to be with you. And that's okay. You can have a fully functional life with it. Now, the other things that you can do, you can certainly do exposures to this, and scripting is going to be fantastic for this. If you haven't done this, if you haven't worked with a therapist before, I'd encourage you to do it, obviously, but scripting is essentially, I would encourage you, and there are going to be a number of websites that you can read how to script. There's going to be a ton of books on it. They're going to talk about scripting. It's an imaginal exposure where you write out your biggest fear actually happening. So you'd write this story about the worst fear coming true with you in your life, that these thoughts are always there. They're never going away. Your whole life is ruined. Every meeting and every relationship and every date and every moment, every movie that you go to see, everything is ruined because of these thoughts. And you read that over and over and over and over and over again. And you get to that place where you eventually go, you know what? These thoughts don't bother me that much, or this idea of it bothering me forever isn't going away, and it doesn't bug me as much anymore. Now, in this present moment, we have the thought, but you're also bemoaning the future and all the things that you're not going to have. But in this moment, you're not living that life. You're living this one. In this moment, you do have that thought. Like I was talking about with the weather, in this moment, I do have hot weather. It's not my favorite, but can I survive this day, this moment with this hot feeling? Until I go on, and maybe tomorrow will be hotter, it might be colder. I know that, rationally speaking, we're eventually going to get out of summer, we're going to get into winter, and it's going to be cool, and then we're going to get into summer again, it's going to be hot. Those are kind of the fluctuations of life. Now, I can't live in that moment because I live in this one, and in this one it's hot. So what am I going to do to get used to? What am I going to do to make space for the heat? And that's going to be some of that shift that you'll be needing to do. Again, I think scripting is going to be really beneficial for this. Lastly, June, what I'd encourage you to do is to resist getting into compulsions and fighting with this thought as best you can. Meaning, not following it down the rabbit hole of how terrible your life is going to be because of them. Now, I know this is separate from thoughts or separate from scripting, which it is separate from scripting. Scripting is a whole separate exercise. But on a day-to-day basis, when your brain starts saying, I'm never going to be able to think anymore. Well, that's BS, and that's a complete lie. You are thinking, and you're going to think. Instead of going, oh my gosh, that's true. How am I ever going to think, quote, right again? Instead, go, that's not true. I am going to think, and I'm going to think about these things. That's a reality for you. So in other words, resist the effort to try to fix this superpower of yours. The superpower ain't getting fixed. Instead, you are fixated on it. So, pulling back on the arguments with it and instead reshifting yourself back into whatever it is that you're doing for that day. If you're in a meeting, focus on that meeting. Now you're going to shift back to your thoughts about your thinking, and that's okay. Shift back to the meeting, or shift back to the date, or shift back to the movie, or to the other project that you're doing, whatever it is that you're doing, and give yourself grace and patience in that fluctuation process between the reality, or between the thing that you're trying to focus on and the thoughts about the things that you're doing in that moment. So, June, I do appreciate the question, and it means a lot that you would ask this. So, thanks so much, and I hope it was helpful. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fearcast. If you liked this episode, go over to iTunes, wherever else that you get your podcasts, and give me a little rating, give me a little review. It means a ton to me. Don't forget to subscribe as well. Also, keep an eye out for calocd.com if you have any questions about it. Check out the website. Again, if you go when this is published, there's probably going to be an under construction page in front of it. So I'm currently building it, and I can only write so many articles at a time before going bonkers. So have some patience with me on that. But thank you so much for listening. If you have a question for a future episode, you can go over to fearcastpodcast.com, and you can go to the submit a question or ask a question link there and write one there, and I will read it, and I will likely put it up on a future episode. If you have any feedback for some of the stuff that I'd mentioned in this episode, feel free to send me a message there as well. I'm happy to put up or add to a future episode some either further support or perhaps even some dissent to some of the suggestions and advice or guidance that I had given. All right, so as always, please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you have questions about getting involved in therapy, you can go to fearcastpodcast.com, and there should be some information up there in the Find Help link. So, until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.